Do you believe that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
Yeah, why not?
I just did not feel fully formed as a human at 16. I know I asked like the why isn't there a White History Month question of a teacher who then said, every month is White History Month.
If we actually want to see young people vote more, we have to give them something to vote for.
From the offices of Civic Ventures in downtown Seattle, this is The Other Washington, a podcast on policy and politics from outside the Beltway.
Way outside the Beltway.
Far from the pundits and politicos who dominate the national debate. I'm David Goldstein.
I'm Paul Constant.
I'm Duji Tahat. I'm
Annie Fadley.
And welcome to Season 2, Episode 9, Why the Hell Won't You Kids Vote?
Oh my God.
Get off my lawn.
Goldie's in a lawn chair right now. You can't see it.
So earlier this season, we talked about voting, how to make it easier, how to do it right, vote by mail. And today we're discussing why the young generation, you're all a bunch of slackers.
I think instead we're going to talk about how to open doors and make it easier and more welcoming for everyone to be involved in democracy as the founding fathers intended. It's not so much about convincing people that they have to do something as letting them know the power that they have.
Goldie, what was voting like when you were young?
So voting was very different in that we had those old mechanical voting machines where it was a whole experience. You go to the polling place. I remember my mother actually taking me into the booth. The curtain would close, and she would let me pull that crank at the end where you felt like you were viscerally, physically voting. As you pulled it, all those gears would grind into place. It was an experience, as opposed to dropping your ballot in the mail. And I do wonder sometimes whether we lose something with vote by mail, that communal experience that I grew up with that you kids don't get today out here.
The boomers also voted at roughly the same turnout rate in the years immediately following the 26th Amendment that lowered the voting age. And this was right at the height of the Vietnam War, where, your lives were at risk. And you had a chance to directly affect that with your vote, but it didn't seemingly impact turnout. So if we can't get people to vote when your life's on the line.
When I was young.
We talked about voting earlier this season, and just coming off the back of the UK election that just happened a couple days ago, they saw over a 20% increase in a 2-year period. That's something that the United States has never seen before. I think should wake up the American political scene to the potential of this youth voting bloc.
Well, the young people turnout in the UK was 66% off of Brexit, where they saw that the old fuddy-duddies could kind of commandeer their lives.
So in this episode, we talked with Toby Crittenden. He was until recently the executive director of the Washington Bus, which is an organization that helps get out the youth vote. For this conversation, we didn't want Goldie to go all Gran Torino on us, so we asked him to leave the room.
He was still loud in the hallway, though.
He still made some noise in the hallway, but I hope you'll enjoy it.
I was the executive director at the Washington Bus, which is an organization here in Washington State that is still going strong. They're even better now that I'm no longer there. But it's focused on engaging and turning out young people in elections, but also on policy and generally political activism and engagement.
Okay. And how long were you there, and how long were you executive director there?
I was there for a really long time. I was very unmillennial. I was there for 9.5 years and came on soon after it started and was there for a lot of weird years and big wins and fun times. And I was executive director for just under 5 years.
Why young people?
Man, you look around right now, like, who else, first and foremost? But like, why me in the bus, which is maybe not exactly the question, but I think gets there a little bit, is, I grew up in a family that was pretty political, but, like, when I got to the time when I had to, like, figure out what I wanted to do, I looked around and I was like, not you, like, you're cool, I'm out. And the bus kind of came along at a time where, and filled a void that I think a lot of places aspire to fill, which is that it is a place and a home for people who don't necessarily see themselves in a lot of other parts of the political process. And I definitely felt that.
I'm curious from like an economic point of view. Obviously, the economy is changing, and what young people will grow into, right? Like the gig economy with automation, all of that is different. Given your expertise, like what are sort of like the major concerns, right? Like, I guess like diagnose the skepticism.
There's some things that are constant no matter where you are, and there are some things that I think are very specific to particular geographies. So one thing we saw consistently across the state was the cost and prohibitive nature of higher education and the debt that young people carry throughout their entire lives, just trying to like pay off college. And I mean, talk to people who are like, I did my summer job and I paid for college. And, I talked to my parents, and my dad loves talking about how he used to throw fish in the fish, market in San Diego. And that was like what paid for college. It's like, you can't really get away with that anymore. Right. And, not everybody has the opportunity to even consider higher education. But a lot more people, I think, would at least have that on the table if the cost wasn't so prohibitive and they didn't want to take the chance of basically being in hock to any number of financial institutions for the rest of their adult lives. But I think specifically, in Seattle, it's crazy because our base of folks in the bus was in Seattle. We did a lot of work statewide, but housing is one of those things where it's not just an income piece, but you see how income and how people's ability to match the sort of surrounding economic reality is so crazy. There was a period of time where all of our staff lived in the city, and by the time I left the bus, there was probably 50% of our staff lived outside the city limits, and we were having to rethink, from a regional perspective, what does political power building even look like when the reality that we've sort of said of this is the place where it's happening, it's in this set political boundary, is you can see the trend line. It's no longer going to be there.
Yeah. In terms of building political power too within communities, I was curious. When you're registering young people and you've got a presence on a lot of college campuses, it's pretty easy to register, young white people in liberal arts colleges who are likely to be engaged anyway. So how do you sort of go beyond that, right? I'm thinking of, I grew up in Yakima. I worked at high schools where they're 85% Hispanic. Right? We've kind of had this conversation. And all those kids are eligible to vote now because those are the children of immigrants. But they've never... I don't think have had that kind of outreach. So I'm curious kind of what lessons you drew at the bus. Yeah,
totally. I think two things are you can never fake the funk, and you have to do it for the long term. And
can't fake the funk.
You can't fake the funk. And that's a real thing. And we see it from folks who just try to engage people at large, send the old dude, and they're like, hey, kids, you like to be responsible, citizens, get your voting together. Everyone's like, oh, hell no, what is this? And that extends, I think, to any time you're talking about, whether it's Latino community, whether it's African American community, if you send someone in who either doesn't know the context, doesn't have relationships, has no connection to that community, you're going to not have luck. So you need to start with building relationships, and that means also being humble about what you do know and don't know, and who you do know and who you don't know, and starting from there. But it's really easy to do that in a 6-month period, and so that brings up the second time, which is you got to consistently do it. And I think the hardest part,
not just during GOTV,
not just during GOTV, you get out that vote. But if you're not there the day after Election Day, it was a little bit hollow.
So what were the best ways you found while you were at the bus to reach young people and actually get them registered to vote? What were the fallback actions?
The fallback actions. Well, there's so many different things. I think that the main thing that we forget about when we are sitting in our rooms and we're sort of political insiders is we forget that nobody else actually knows as much about this as we do, right? We are so effing weird and off the charts. We're not normal. And so so much of what we the fundamental building block, and I think this is not just for the bus, but I think it should be for everybody who's interested in changing who's at the table, is always meet people where they are. And that was one of our just guiding tenets of the bus. But so much of that is just it's got to be accessible, and it's got to be something that people actually want to spend their time on. People have limited time, right? It doesn't matter if you're this the college kids have all this free time, they're just hanging out, they're on the quad with the frisbees, or young people are out drinking at bars, and sure, but also people people have a lot of demands on their time. And if you're trying to actually get folks who are dealing with like real life stuff, you have to make it really present and really tangible and really accessible. So tactically, it looks really different, but the underpinning has to always be lower the barrier. Like, don't make it that you have to come all the way over across town to do a thing. You go to where the people are. You don't make it so that it's like jargon and insidery and boring. Like, God bless legislative districts. To salute to everybody. Anybody's listening who goes to those, like, you guys are doing God's work. But this is like, it's not going to be what most people want to spend their Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evenings doing. So a lot of the principle that we operated on was we're never going to make politics cool, because people always were like, the bus, you make politics so cool. It's like, no, that's just not going to happen. Like, but you got to go where people actually want to be, where things are already cool, and bring stuff to people. So working with Capitol Hill Block Party, working in the music and arts and culture world, those were all the reason we focused on those as places to do the work is because we didn't have to fill the room. Now the question always becomes, are you just going to places that you want to go to? And if you want to go to, I, like straight white dude, want to go to this spot, who's not going there? How do you make sure you are filling a room with staff and strategic advisors who are connecting you to other places and other events where it's not just a bunch of straight white dudes?
I think that worked on me. The bus registered me at Sasquatch Music Festival.
Bam! There it is.
When I was in high school.
Yeah, exactly. Sasquatch is a great example. Except Sasquatch, there's so many Canadians. I love Sasquatch,
Lots
but it's
of
like,
Canadians.
they know a lot about American politics, though. They're like, oh, well, let's talk about like your state legislative races. I'm like, but you're from Saskatchewan. What is going on here?
Do you consider sort of one registered voter that's a youth a win, or do you track them after that to make sure that they're actually voting?
Both. Yeah, every registered voter is a huge win on its own, because it's just like, it's so much work to register people to vote. You'd think it should be easy. It's like never easy. But when the bus registers, and anybody who runs a voter registration campaign should track that data, put it into the voter file, put it into your own personal data, all this stuff is just freely accessible information. What we did at the bus was we would take that information, we would roll that over to our voter contact and get out the vote work. So we keep it, not issue specific. It would just be, make sure you get your ballot in, make sure you know that your ballot's in your mailbox, make sure that you have a stamp or know where your drop box is. And so a lot of our work was you register folks, but you spend those weeks of get out the vote period really like amping up how you get people to become actually active voters. So the success is that they vote, but the real success is that they register, they vote, and then they stay registered the next year, because we would keep people in the database. So every year that voter file grows bigger and bigger. People move and they leave the state, and things change, but you always have this kind of constantly like heated and vibrant pool of voters.
Do you have any idea what percentage of people the bus registers vote?
Depends from year to year. But I remember the best data we have was, because in the presidential years are the ones that people really like to track. This is 2012, so it's a little bit of a throwback, but I'm super proud of this number. So statewide, about 81% of people voted in the same, like all ages. In young people, 18 to 29-year-old voters, it was 61% overall statewide. For people that bus registered, it was 81%. So literally, it was a 20-point gap that was made up that basically evened out the difference between young folks who were in our pool and overall voters. So we know that it makes a difference, and so much of it is like, again, getting away from the transactional piece, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work that has been done in the last couple of years has been to move away from we touch you once when we register you, we touch you a second time when you vote, and that's it, to incorporating text messaging, building in sort of like relationship building stuff. So it's actually trying to like cultivate something that is a little more authentic than just like, you're a vote to us. You're actually like a real person.
Maybe you could settle a little tiff we had in the office before we came over here. Do you believe that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
Yeah, why not?
Well,
yeah, Paul, why not?
I mean, I haven't done a lot of deep thinking on this, but I think about myself when I was 16, and I didn't have any sort of experience at all in the world. Mm-hmm. If you had asked me to do any thinking about, I don't know, welfare or anything like that, in my own like comfortable, suburban life, I probably would have not seen the utility of it. Mm-hmm. Like I had no no empathy. I had no understanding of anything. I think this was before 16, but I know I asked like the why isn't there a White History Month question of a teacher who then said, every month is White History Month. And
that was a good teacher.
Bless him for that. Yeah, it was exactly. It was just the right answer. But I mean, I just did not feel fully formed as a human at 16. And I think that it could wind up in a lot of parents sort of getting extra votes, additional votes, by proxy votes through their kids and things like that. It seems like 18, I wouldn't say I was fully baked as a human yet then either, but like it's at least closer. So yeah, that's
and
my
you're legally
unformed
considered an adult.
And you're legally considered an adult.
All
too.
that, I hear all that. The legal part, I think, is probably the most important piece of that because it's a federal elections versus local elections. But the sad truth is that a lot of that is still happening regardless of what age you are. And I will tell you, I've talked to more people at doors in random small towns across the state and random big cities and neighborhoods in Seattle, and the number of people you talk to and they're at the door and they say, oh, I'm just going to vote the way my wife votes, or I'm just going to vote the way my husband votes, and you don't need to talk to me. It's this stuff. This is not like an age specific thing, and I agree. There's certainly you can totally see that happening where parents here's how you do it. You do this, that, the other thing. Most people tend to vote based on party ID. That's just the largest determinant of how people vote in general. And B, they tend to follow the same party as their parents. So that tends to happen not on issue initiatives, and there's certainly nuance to that, but a lot of that's already happening. I do think, though, that if you imagine this for a second, just imagine if you were a candidate for office in a place where 16-year-olds had the vote, and that was actually a voting block. Maybe you wouldn't change everything you did about your campaign, but right now 18's the bottom limit, right? So people basically voters don't care about 18 to 22-year-old voters. Voters love 18 to 22-year-olds. Candidates, by and large, don't really care about 18 to 22-year-olds because that's a lot of folks who are moving, they're in college, they're in transitionary periods, and it'll always be the first thing that gets squeezed out of a campaign plan, every time. And if you actually had to think about the other side of 18, of 18 is not where people start to care, but 18 is they've kind of been ramping up to it for a little while. I actually think you might see some of the infrastructure that is campaigns do a little different choice making. And I'm not saying it would change the whole game entirely. Honestly, I just think it would be rad if 16-year-olds are able to vote, especially for school board elections and stuff like that that's super directly impactful. Everything would have to be local unless there was a constitutional situation.
Right. I think the thing that turned me around was meeting 97-year-old people who were just trying to convince me Donald Trump was handsome. That particular line of argument over the course of the last cycle made me realize if we don't have limits at the top, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have limits at the bottom.
Yeah, but you're still a person when you're 97. You can't just push it back on the other end to fight the people that you don't agree with.
I've heard people actually throw this idea out here, which I think is a hilarious idea. Because I think it's a terrible thing to call someone, say you stop being a person at some point. Sure. But at the same time, you hate 97-year-olds.
I do.
It's okay. You can just let it out.
Are you ageist?
Yeah. But the thing is, you can see there is, I think, from a logical standpoint, there's a beginning, there could be an end, right? Why not? And so, whether I agree with that or not, that's not the hill I want to die on. Right. But someone somewhere does.
And 16-year-olds are going to be more invested because they're going to be around in 20 years.
I just think about the Duggars and how they had so many kids because they want to outvote liberals.
Was that their thinking, really?
That's part of it, yeah.
Oh, man, they're going to be so disappointed.
Let's manufacture 30 voters.
When half their kids...
allowed a bunch of families.
Half their kids are...
The Quiverful movement.
Yes,
you want to have...
you want
to thing? Yeah, it's a Christian, evangelical Christian thing. You have as many kids as you can in the hopes that you'll...
We're going to have to do a deep dive on
overpower, overpower liberals.
We did some digging, and we realized in the 70s, shortly after the 26th Amendment was ratified, is that the word?
It's beautiful.
The voting percentage is actually not that far off. Turnout isn't very different than millennials now, and we had roughly the same number of people. So given that, given that the atmosphere was Vietnam and that they were being drafted and their lives were, literally on the line, and that wasn't enough of a motivator to sort of increase turnout.
I believe the first one was the first time 18-year-olds were able to vote in this country. 18 to 21-year-olds, it was something like 51% or something like that was the first turnout. Yeah. And right now it's about the same.
It's about 50%, yeah. If the apathy was still sort of rampant then, how do you go about invigorating people? How do you convince them to vote?
This is a thing that people ask all the time. It's so how do you get young people to vote? And I mean, the thing is, there's no silver bullet. And I think that the more we search for that, we miss the point, which is that there's a whole set of things that need to happen, bits and pieces here and there, and you need to turn all the dials in order to get this to happen. Young people deal with a lot of things that other generations don't have to deal with, or other age groups, but at the same time, the basic principles are pretty much aligned, right? You look at what actually gets people to vote and gets people to care. It's not about I love VoteBot, but VoteBot's not the thing that's going to make young people vote. What's going to make people vote is when the issues that are on the ballot, when the candidates that are running, and when the infrastructure that is actually, $1 billion industry geared at getting people to vote is pointed at them, you're going to start seeing some of these things change. And I just think that people really write off this idea that it's we haven't seen change, so there won't be change. And it's there will be different turnout levels at different ages, no matter what, just like there are across different cities, different parts of the state. But if we actually want to see young people vote more, we have to give them something to vote for. And the hardest thing about being an organization that was focused on young people is that everybody likes young people, but not everybody likes the things that are good for young people. Mm-hmm. And what we saw, the election in UK just this last week, there was a huge spike in young voters. And, I'm not fully a Corbynite, I'm not all in on red labor and whatever, but you saw a cause and effect that is, I think, pretty dramatic. And campaigns don't put money into investing in turning out young voters because they see that as a losing sort of strategy. They don't necessarily prioritize issues that are actually important for young voters, and they wonder why young people don't show up. And so I think that there's all these small things we can do, but if we could get the actual campaign industry to actually invest in young people and to view them not just as a photo op, but as an actual constituency, you would see things like what happened in the UK. So, there's a guy who used to run the Colorado affiliate of the Bus World, the New Era Colorado. He said that, the way that young people are treated in the political process, it's like if you are throwing a party and you don't invite somebody and you wonder why they didn't show up, maybe the problem isn't them, but it's you. And so the idea is right? I mean, it's why don't we throw a party that people actually want to not only be there, but are invited to? And we have not invited young people to the party in a substantive way, in my opinion.
Should young people run for office?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What's the best case for it? Convince me.
Well, I mean, okay, come on. Should people run for office?
Should young people run?
No. I mean, what you're asking is, should people run for office? Should all young people run for office? No. Should all straight white dudes have a bomb that goes off in their brain that says, now is my time? Absolutely not. And yet they do. I would much rather have young people running for office than every straight white dude who's it's my time. I'm here. I'm in. Hands down. So, yeah. Cool. More is merrier. I got no beef with anybody running for office because that is a hard thing to do. What I want is for this generation, which is the most diverse generation this country's ever seen,
Amen,
to actually be at the tip of the spear. So if that's what it takes, hell yeah, get in there.
Straight white dudes, get out the way.
Out the way.
Let's go.
Yeah. All right. I am leaving right now.
I think more young people would vote for people like them.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the whole thing of if you where's the Latino vote in Yakima? It's how many Latinos have been elected to office in Yakima over the last 30 years?
3, and that was 3 years ago when the ACLU won a case in the Supreme Court based on the Voting Rights Act.
Exactly. Yeah. So you start saying, I wonder if there's a cause and effect going on here.
For sure.
Who's not invited to the party?
Yes.
Invite more people to the party. Less straight white dudes.
Make it a fun party.
You'll have better parties, I guarantee.
There'll be more rhythm. That's right. All right. On that note.
The Other Washington is a production of Civic Action. Thank you to Large Media and Tina Knoll for everything.
Many thanks to our benevolent plutocratic overlord Nick Hanauer for making this possible.
Thanks to our guest Toby Crittenden and to the youths of America for only voting sort of okay.
If you like what we're doing here, please rate us and give us a review at iTunes and Stitchers and wherever you get your podcasts.
Follow us on Twitter at Civic Action and at Civic Skunkworks. You can also read our wonderful pieces of writing on Medium at civicskunk.works. and Facebook at Civic Skunk Works.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to vote.